All right, Rabosai, good morning, good morning. Say, maybe a little bit louder. Yeah, I think. Good morning, Chava. Let's Emir Hashem begin. Beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of, perfect, thank you, the month of Shvat. To thank Mrs. Bracha Strimber for dedicating all the Shimon Drushos this month in memory of her husband, Avram ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi Zichron Livracha, and to thank Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating all the Shimon this month in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Shulamis Bas Susha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an Aliyah, the family, and Nechama, and Shulamis Bas Susha Refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So with that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today. Actually, not really that much to do today, but we have a lot to do today, like in the existential level. There's always a lot to do. The daf itself happens not to be a very long daf, but a very interesting one nevertheless. So remember again, today's daf is daf Vav, page 6. In Meseches Nazir Haba Alinu Latova. So incredible. So we are picking up a Meretz Hashem 3 lines up from the bottom, Hayom Beis. 3 lines up from the bottom, 5b. So again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit, we are in the midst of a dramatic machlokes between Rav Masna and Bar Pada. What's the machlokes? I will say the machlokes is in the very essence of Nazirus. Specifically, Mishnah introduced us to the idea of a concept of a stam neder Nazirus. Person goes ahead and makes a Harini Nazir, but doesn't attach a time frame to his neder Nazirus. So of course the shaila becomes, how long is a person a Nazir for? So the Mishnah said 30 days. Stam neder Nazirus is 30 days. There's a machlokes Rav Masna and Bar Pada. So what does 30 days mean? So Rav Masna says 30 days means exactly that, 30 days, based on an interesting gematria of Yihiyah. Yihiyah, fine. Bar Pada said no. In fact, and Stam Neder Nazirus is really 29 days. 29 days. Now, by the way, you'll ask yourself, so what does Bar Pada do with the Mishnah that says Stam Neder Nazirus is 30 days? Okay, it's not complicated because in Bar Pada's model, remember again, the active Neder Nazirus is for 29 days. And then what happens on day 30? You bring all of your concluding sacrifices. So kind of when you look at their Neder Nazirus, the process is a process for 30 days, but the active vow only lasts for 29. Shabbos say this is the fundamental machlokes. So here we go. So Tnan, we learned Mishnah, Nazir Beis Nazirus, interesting case. Mostly we're going to learn about this. Let's say a person takes on 2 consecutive periods of Nazirus. Okay? So a person says, Hareini Nazir. We'll discuss this. So essentially a person becomes a Nazir for 2 consecutive periods. So what's the halacha? So Megalechas Harishona Yom Lamed. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, he goes ahead and at the end of the first Neder Nazirus, he takes his haircut on day 30. I'm sorry, Megalechas Harishona Yom Lamed Ve'echad, important piece. He takes his haircut on day 31 for the first Neder Nazirus. Vashniya L'Shisha Ve'echad, and he takes his haircut for the conclusion of the second Neder Nazirus when? Day 61. Shabbos said this works out beautifully for who? Bishlam Rav Masna Necha. According to Rav Masna, that's great. Because remember again, according to Rav Masna, remember again, a Stam Neder Nazirus is for how long? 30 days. So therefore again, Nazirus number 1 is for 30 days, haircut day 31. Nazirus, for second Nazirus is 60 days, another 30 days, haircut day 61. Works out perfectly. Tap above, Ella, Lebar Pada Kasha. But Bar Pada, this is going to be a question, because according to Bar Pada, I will say, really, when should the haircut take place? Day 30, not day 31. Because according to Bar Pada, ultimately, again, the Nazirus itself, the active vow, will last 29 days, and the haircuts or concluding rites take place on day number 30. Bar Pada, no, Ema Seifa. Look at the end. Look at the Seifa of that Mishnah. What was the Seifa of that Mishnah? V'em gilach es harishon liyom shloshim. And if indeed he took his haircut for the first Neder Nazirus on day 30, Megaleach es hashniya liyom shishim. He concludes the second Neder Nazirus on day 60. So Bar Pada says the Seifa works like me. So Bar Pada says the Seifa teaches you that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and observe Neder Nazirus for 29 days, then haircut on day 30. Similarly, again, 59 days or day 59, and then haircut on day 60. Ella Seifa, Misayele. So we'll say, that's fine. I understand that the Seifa goes ahead and helps Bar Pada. But still, I'll say we're faced with a fundamental problem, which is what? What do you do with the Reisha? In other words, Bar Pada, the Mishnah is a unit, so what do you do with the Reisha? Because the Reish, remember again, is the one that said that if a person took 2 consecutive Nidre Naziros, he takes his haircut for the first one on day 31, haircut for the second one on day 61, which supports Rav Masna against Bar Pada. So Bar Pada, what do you do with the Reisha? Not a problem. But Omer Shleimim. So we had this in yesterday's daf as well. So both say, even Bar Pada will agree like this. Bar Pada himself says that if a person says, Hareini Nazir, unquite, without attaching a time frame, how long is a person Nazir for? Bar Pada, how long? How long? 29 days. According to Bar Pada, right? 29 days active Neder Naziros, and then again, on day 30 is when you take your haircut, concluding rites. That's Bar Pada's model. Bar Pada would agree that if a person were to say, Hareini Nazir, Bishvil Shloshim Yom Shleimim, I am a Nazir for 30 complete days. How long does a person become a Nazir for? 30 complete days. They will say, remember again, our discussion over here is really on the floor, not the ceiling. What we're going to see is when you become a Nazir, we're going to see the Rambam, we're going to see when we finish the Sugya, there's a minimum amount of time for which you could become a Nazir. Anything above that minimum, you have the ability to stipulate. So Rabbi Pada is going to say, look, when a person says Harini Nazir, what you've done is you've become a Nazir for 29 days, right? And then day number 30 is the day that you bring your concluding rites, your haircut. If a person says, I'm a Nazir for 30, I'm an active Nazir for 30 days. I don't mean I'm an active Nazir that like I jog every morning. In other words, I'm a Nazir. I'm in a state of. I want to just give a little feedback to this year. Somebody listened to the podcast said, Rabbi Silber, you're hilarious. How come no one laughs at your jokes in Shir? Okay, good. I say so. I said it's very simple. I said, I know this person. I said, you listen to the Shir at 10 a.m., right? Everyone else is listening to the Shir at 5:45 a.m., right? I could be Modi sitting up here giving daf. It wouldn't make a difference, right? Anyway, so the Gemara says as follows. Bar Pada will say that the Reisha ultimately is Shleimim, where a person is actively saying, I'm making the neder for 30 days. So a person makes a neder naziros like that, even Bar Pada would agree that such a neder would work. Beautiful. Rav Masna kasha seif. I suppose here's the problem. So now what does Rav Masna, who holds that a neder naziros is 30 active days, what does he do with the seifa? Because the seifa says, if you took your haircut on day 30, it works. And if you take your haircut on day 60, it works. But then you would only be observing a 29-day duration of Naziros. So according to Bar Pada, that's absolutely fine. But what does Rav Masna do with that? So Amar Lecha Rav Masna, Kidiktani Seifa. So also Rav Masna says, here's the difference. The Seifa explains, Yom Shloshim Ola Lekan, Ula Kan. I will say very interesting. So Rav Masna says, no. The Mishnah already explains this. I will say we have this again. We've seen a lot of this already in yesterday's daf. That day number 30 works both ways. Day number 30 has a dual identity. In other words, in the case of consecutive Neder Naziros, day number 30 will act as what? The last day of Neder number 1 and the first day of Neder number 2. Based on the concept, Maihi Miktsas Hayom Kikulo. So once again, we saw this yesterday. Miktsas Hayom Kikulo, part of the day counts as the whole. Now, I will say we see this concept. I Richter spoke about this also yesterday in Shir. We see this concept in many areas of halacha, most notably, right, Avelos, by Shiva. We know that Shiva is 7 days. Yet again, the halacha is that all one has to do on the 7th day is sit for a little bit of time, and then Shiva is concluded. What about the Miktsas Kekulo? Part of the day counts as the whole. There are other examples of this in halacha as well. But again, the Gemara is suggesting over here that according to Rav Masna, the Seifa is coming to teach me that on day number 30, once you observe part of day number 30, that ends off the first vow and ultimately effectively becomes day 31 as well for the next vow as well. To which the Gemara says, Ha'amra Chadazimna. But we already learned the concept of Miktasim Kikulo. We already spoke about that. To which the Gemara says, Ma'avdatema, what would you have thought? I would have thought Miktasim Kikulo only works for one Neder Naziros. Right? Because Rabbi say, what would Miktasim Kikulo do for one Neder Naziros? Essentially, it says that once you've observed part of the day, you've observed the whole day. But I would have thought, avalishte nezirus. I will say perhaps I would not apply the concept of mixing kekulo for 2 consecutive terms of Nazirus. I will say, now why not? Listen, it's actually very interesting. You see, when you go ahead and you say, let's say I'm Harini Nazir, right? I become a Nazir, and now again, I get to day number 30, we say Mixus and Kukulo. No problem. What does that tell me? It tells you once I observe part of the 30th day, it's Ki'ilu what? I've observed the whole. See, I would have thought this concept applies in 1 Neder Nazirus, but not in 2. Because Rabbi say, what happens when you say Mixus and Kukulo in 2 Neder Nazirus? Essentially, that one day almost has like a dual identity, right? It's going to be like the conclusion of the first duration of the first term and day number 1 of the second term. Now that's a big chiddush, because then what you're saying is one day could potentially have a dual identity. Kamashman, the Gemara says that it does. Kashlan, that mixes kekulo works for both days, or I should say, works in both cases. Both in the case of 1 Neder Nazirus, as well as for 2 consecutive terms as well. And I will say, again, we're going to see that halacha l'maisa, a lot of these things that we're going through over here don't actually apply, but nevertheless, it's quite fascinating to go through the process. So Tanan, so I will say again, so just to orient ourselves, we are still steeped in this machlokes Bar Pada and Rav Masna, namely about what is the minimum duration for a neder nazirus. So again, Rav Masna telling me 30 days. 30 days of active observance of nazirus, and then day 31 is when you would bring your concluding rituals and rites. Bar Pada, 29 days active nazirus. Day 30 is when you'll bring your karbanos, cut your hair. Fine, so that's still a machlokes, and we're trying to prove, disprove. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tanan. Im gilach yom shishim chasra echad. We'll say if a person, again, in the case that we had of 2 consecutive Nidrei Nazirus, right? So a person went ahead and cut his hair on the 59th day, shishim chasra echad, yatsa. Ultimately, again, you're yotzei. Sheyom shloshim olelo min minyan. Because day number 30 ultimately counts towards what? Towards the second Neder Nazirus. So we'll say that's beautiful. Bishtom Rav Masna neicha. According to Rav Masna, that works. El bar pada lamali lamali. According to Rav Pada, what it needs ha'amar shloshim chaser echad. So it's like according to Rav Masna, instead the Mishnah has to make the exception. But according to Rav Pada, this is the way that Nazirus normally works. To which the Gemara says, "Amalacha ana nami aha samchi." Rav Pada says, "Oh, this halacha, this is the source for my psak. This is the source for my psak." See, I will say, I do want to point out something very interesting. If you notice, by the way, when the Gemara introduced us to Bar Pada and to Rav Masna, if you notice that halacha l'maisa, the Gemara didn't really give us Bar Pada's logic, right? Rav Masna's logic was Yihiyeh, a gematria. When it came to Bar Pada said Kineged Nazir Nizra Morim Batorah. So Bar Pada said again the number of mentions in the Torah, but the Gemara poked some holes in that. So the Gemara says, so Bar Pada has that drasha, but now in addition, Bar Pada says, this Mishnah that we're quoting over here, this is actually the source for my Psak Halacha. Okay. Tanan, Misha Maharini Nazir was another very interesting case. So again, we're not finished yet. We're still in this machlokes Bar Pada and Rav Masna. So Misha Amar Harini Nazir Nit Mayom Shloshim Sosra Sakol. So we're gonna talk about all of these cases in here, Hashem, which are all quite interesting. So we'll see. This is actually just in about 10 days from now. We'll get to this. So Misha Harini Nazir. Person said, "I'm a Nazir," and what happens? Nitma Yom Shloshim. So we'll say, now watch this. Let's see. We're dealing now with the case of where a guy says Harini Nazir. So what happens if you say Harini Nazir without attaching a specified time frame to it? 30 days. Fine. On day number 30, the Nazir becomes Tameh. Nazir becomes Tameh. So what's the halach over here? So the Gemara says, Nitma Yom Shloshim, Soser Es HaKol. You have lost the entire Neder Nazirus. So in other words, you have to start all over again. So says the Gemara, so Bishno the Rav Masna Necha, Ela Bar Pada Kasha. So I will say this makes perfect sense according to Rav Masna. Why? Because according to Rav Masna, how long is a Neder Nazirus? How long is active Nazirus? 30 days. So when you become Tameh on day number 30, you have become Tameh in the midst of active Nazirus. So it makes sense, therefore, that what? That halacha l'maisa is going to have to start all over again. But according to Bar Pada, how long does active Nazirus last for? 29 days. If you become Tameh on day number 30, what should happen? What should happen? Nothing. In other words, you'll have to go through the process of becoming Tahar for your Tumah, or it's Paraduma, whatever else, but Lamaisa, Legabe your Nazirus, you've effectively ended your Nazirus. I was saying, let me just clarify. Everyone agrees that if you took upon yourself an Eder Nazirus, and then after the act of observance ended, you became Tameh, even if it's before you've offered up all of your requisite karbanos, everyone agrees, well, I should say everyone, for now, everyone agrees that you don't have to repeat an Neder Nazirus. The only time you have to repeat a Neder Nazirus is if you become Tameh during the duration of the active observance of Nazirus. So Rabbi says, so now over here in our case, Nazir becomes Tameh on day 30. The Mishnah says, gotta repeat the whole thing. So okay, so that means that on day 30 is still the period of active Nazirus. According to Rav Masna, makes perfect sense. According to Bar Pada, it's a kasha. Amud Beis Rabbi say. So Amar Lecha Bar Pada will say 1 second. Ema Seifa. Look at the Seifa. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Eino Soser Ela Shiva. Very interesting, Rabbi saying. Rabbi Eliezer says, no. You don't lose 30 days. Rather, what do you lose? 7 days. Rabbi saying, now where do we get 7 days from? Take a look at Rashi on the top left. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Eino Soser Ela Zayin Kineged Osen Yomim Shemona Bohen Shlishi Ushvi Machmas Tuma. So we'll say, where does 7 come from? Because remember, the case we're dealing with over here is the guy's becoming Tameh. What type of Tumah? Tumas Meis. How long is the process for purification from Tumas Meis? 7 days. 7 days. So we'll say, it's very interesting. So it's like a shtickle arbitrary, but Rabbi Eliezer is coming along and saying, no, you don't lose 30 days, you just lose 7 days. 7 days. So in other words, you'll have to make up seven days of Nazirus, corresponding to the 7 days of the purification process. So here's the problem I will say, that this doesn't seem to shtim at all. So watch this. So I don't understand. Lemaisa. So if you hold that a stam neder nazirus is 30 days, so I don't understand. If you become Tameh on day number 30, you should have to repeat the whole thing. What are you talking about 7 days? So I said, this is fascinating. Kasav Rabbi Eliezer, Miktsas Hayom Kikulo. Fascinating. Rabbi Eliezer says, isn't this incredible? Rabbi Eliezer says, no, we'll say, what's the case? When did you become Tameh on day number 30? When did you become Tameh? Sometime after day number 30 started. Obviously, if you're becoming Tameh on day number 30, that means day number 30 started. So Rabbi Eliezer holds Miktsas Yom Kikulo. Therefore, what does that mean, Abba? What does that mean? That as long as you observed part of the 30th day, then what's happened? It's as if you've observed the entire 30th day. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, in reality, the active duration or the duration of your active Nazirus is already over. He's just kind of throwing in, like, it almost seems like a shtickle penalty that you're going to have to observe another 7 days corresponding to the 7 days of Tumah. But he will not make you repeat the entire duration. Why? Because effectively, you've finished the duration of your Nazirus because Miktsas Yom Kekulo. Incredible. So Tanan was another case, Tanan, Hareini Nazir Mea Yom, interesting case. I'm a Nazir for 100 days. Now, say in this case over here, so a person is actively making this declaration. I am a Nazir for 100 days. So what's the halacha? Nitma Yom Mea, he becomes Tameh on Yom Mea, right? 100 days. We'll say, what happens when you become Tameh on day number 100? It's like, oh, right? In other words, you made it all the way. It becomes Tameh on day 100. So what happens? Nitma Yom Mea, Soser Es Hakol. Okay? We'll say that's that. We'll say, by the way, you understand like the Musar Haskell in that? The Musar Haskell is, what's the Musar Haskell? Something's not done until it's done. So we'll say, you know how this happens in life for so many of us, is that we start on something, we're all excited, and then kind of once it gets almost done, I'm like in my mind, oh, almost done? Like Miktsas Yom Kikulo, right? Almost done? Almost done is done. Almost done is done. And I will say that's why in life, so many of us have things that we start, whether it's projects, Ruchni projects, Gashmi projects, and like we started, and we get it to a state where it's like kind of done, and we let it go, and we let it go, and life is filled with these almost done type of projects. And what the Gemara is teaching us, I'll say, is no, something's done when it's done. That's why again we're going to see, I will say that halacha l'maisa, the Gemara talks about this, that the Torah gives Yoshua, the Navi gives Yoshua credit for going ahead and burying the Atzmos Yosef. But Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who took them from Mitzrayim, carried them for 40 years. It's true, but he didn't get them to Shechem. Who got the remains of Yosef to Shechem? Who at the end of the day, who buried the remains of Yosef? It was Yoshua. It was Yoshua. So Gemara says, we're going to see this. Hakol holich achar hachitum. Right? Everything is dependent. We're going to see actually Mesilas Yesharim. Everything is determined by how you end. So both say, and it's this interesting dialectic in Yiddishkeit. Right? On one hand, we place incredible focus on effort. On effort. So sometimes because I don't control the conclusion, I don't control the end. So the good news is Kadosh Baruch Hu says it's okay. Even if you can't deliver results, you could always deliver effort. So we say that on one hand, and I will say, what do I say out of the other side of my mouth? It's all about results. It's all about results. So which one is it? Is it all about the effort or is it all about the results? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. I will say, and again, it depends. There are some situations in life where I don't drive the results. In those situations, all that is incumbent upon me, as the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Lo alecha hamalacha ligmar. Sometimes I can't bring the task, whatever the task is, to the finish line. I can't, for a variety of reasons. In those situations where I can't bring it to the finish line myself, that's fine. The results are not on you. The effort's on you. But I will say there are so many other times in life where I am capable of delivering results. If I'm capable of delivering results, then ultimately success is only defined by crossing the finish line. Effort is not enough. You have to be a closer. You have to deliver. You have to cross the finish line. So the Gemara says, it's incredible. It's incredible. Come on, the guy's on day 100. That's fine. You're almost there. But when are you finished? When are you finished? When you're finished. And I will say, it's a big mussar for us, because sometimes in life we start on things, and usually when you start on something in life, it has that new initiative smell, right? That new relationship smell, then whatever that newness is, and then the newness wears off. I lose interest and I move on to something else. I move on to distracted focus. Like we saw yesterday, I get distracted. Right? So again, the Gemara is saying, finish it up. Whatever you started, finish it up. You're not finished with your Neder Naziros until day 100 is completed. V'haraya, you become tummy on day 100, you lose the whole thing. The Gemara goes like to Rabbi Elazar says, no, it's fascinating. You only lose 30 days. 30 days, not the whole thing, only 30 days. So I don't understand. We just said before, Rabbi Elazar holds mixus yom kekulo. Then I will say, if you hold mixus yom kekulo, then what does that tell you? What does that tell you? That therefore, once he began day 100, it should be like what? He completed the day in its entirety. So at the end of the day, why 30 days? In other words, again, Rabbi Elazar says, what do you have to repeat? 7 days. Why 7 days? Corresponding to the process for Tara from your Tumah. But where does 30 come from? To which the Gemara says, Nistar Shiva. So go fine, observe 7 days. But if Rabbi Elazar, if you don't hold Mitzvah Kekula, the part of the day counts as the whole, then what? Listar Kulu. Then you should lose the entire 100. To which the Gemara says, Li'olam lo aminon mikza sayom kekulo. So listen to this. Rabbi Elazar really holds, no, we don't hold mikzas and kekulo. Part of the day does not count as the whole. So one second. If that's the case, then when the Nazir becomes tameh on day 100, what should be the halacha? You should have to repeat the whole 100. Ihachi listar kulhu. So you should have to repeat the full 100. Amreish lakish hainu tam Rabbi Eliezer amar kra zos toras hanazir biyom melos yemei nizro. This is fascinating, Josh Rabbi said. Rabbi says like this. This is the halacha of the Nazir. Biyom melos yemei nizro. Rabbi say. So let me just tell you Pashup Pshat. Pashup Pshat in the pasuk is the Torah is telling me about the process that the Nazir has to undergo when he completes his neder Nazirus. That's the Pasha Pshat. This is the Nazir. This is the law of the Nazir. Biyom Malos Yemei Nizro. When he goes ahead and he finishes his neder Nazirus. Rabbi Eliezer is a fascinating drasha. He says, HaTorah Amra Nitma Biyom Malos Tein Lo Toras Nazir. He'll say this is wild. So Reish Lakish, I'm sorry, Rabbi Eliezer says, here's how you read it. Zos Toras HaNazir, right? This is the halacha of the Nazir. If he becomes Tameh on the Yom Malos, so what happens if a Nazir becomes Tameh on the day on which he concludes his Neder Nazirus? What should you do? Yemei Nizro. Impose upon him, Yemei Nizro, the days of his Nazirus. Rabbi say, what's the minimum definition of his Yemei Nazirus? 30 days. 30 days. Therefore, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi say, wild drasha. Rabbi Eliezer says, therefore, if you're a guy who says, I'm a Nazir for 100 days, and he becomes Tameh on day 100, first of all, we're now saying Rabbi Eliezer does not hold Miktsas Hayom Kikulo. So why doesn't he have to repeat the full 100? A special drasha. Special drasha, if you become Tameh on Yom Malos, on the concluding day of your Nazirus, we simply impose upon you a minimum duration of Nazirus. You don't have to repeat the whole thing, only 30 days. Incredible. To which the Gemara's Lema Ketanoi, Shabbos say, now again, I just want to point out, we're still back where we started, right? This is all interesting, right? But Lamaisa, we are still in this machlokes, Rav Masna and Bar Pada. Is the minimum duration of a neder Nazirus 30 active days of Nazirus like Rav Masna, or 29 active days of Nazirus like Bar Pada? To which the Gemara's Lema Ketanoi, maybe the machlokes Rav Masna and Bar Pada is in fact a machlokes Tanoi. What's the machlokes? Here we go. The pasuk says until the conclusion of the days. So watch this. The Gemara says, "Shomani miyot yamim shnayim." So now what the Gemara is saying is like this. This phrase of ad melos yamim is indicating to me a minimum duration for Nazirus. So what is the minimum duration for Nazirus? So Shomani miyot yamim shnayim. Rabbi says, so yamim. What's the minimum definition of yamim? 2 days. Talmud Lomar, Kadosh Yiyeh. Therefore, both say the pasuk Kadosh Yiyeh, Gadol Pera Sa'ar Rosho. He'll be consecrated, or it will be consecrated, the growth of his hair. And Ein Gidul Seyar Pachos Mishloshim. They both say the growth of hair only becomes something significant after 30 days. After 30 days, Divi Rabbi Yoshia, we'll say these words of Rabbi Yoshia. So we'll say, so Rabbi Yoshia is saying, minimum amount 30 days. Rabbi Yonasan Omer, Einot Sarech. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, you don't need this. Harihu Omer, Ad Melos Yamim. Right, until the conclusion of days. So the Gemara says, Havi Omer Shloshim. The Rabbi will say, where do you find a unit of days that have to be filled out? Ultimately, again, these are 30 days. Which 30 days? The 30 days of the month. Now, I will say this is actually very interesting. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Yonasan says, this lashon, the fact that the Torah goes ahead and by Nazir uses a lashon of melos yamim. Now, melos yamim means literally, again, days which become filled. So Rabbi Yonasan says, what's an example of days in a unit that become filled? See, interesting enough, what could it be? Days of the month. Because we'll say the days of the month are filled in different ways. Meaning what? Sometimes the days of the month are 29 days. Sometimes the days of the month are 30 days. So we'll say, see, Rabbi Yonasan says over here that halacha l'maisa, so again, we'll say, just you're asking yourself, what's the connection between Nazirus and the days of the month? What Rabbi Yonasan is really focused on over here is the lashon of melos. Melos means male, complete. So where else do you find a unit of time that is completed by a certain number of days? And the answer is the month. But here's what's interesting about the month. The month could also be completed by how many days? 29. So this is the fundamental machlokus over here between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan is saying like this, look, the pasuk says melos, but it doesn't define it. So what's melos? Well, there's a modifier. What's the modifier? The modifier is gadel pera sa'arosho. Enough time for his hair to really grow out. What's the minimum amount of time it takes for the hair to really grow out? 30 days. Therefore, again, Rabbi Yoshia says, Stam Neder Nazirus is 30 days. Rabbi Yonason, on the other hand, says the lashon of melos is to fill up a certain number of days. Now, let's say, where else do we find the concept of using days to fill up a certain unit? Days of the month. When it comes to days of the month, you could have a 29-month day. So as such, we see that even 29 days is the filling of a unit. So melos could even mean 29 days. And we'll say again, therefore, Rabbi Yonason says that a stam neder nazirus is going to be 29 active days of nazirus. Beautiful. To which the Gemara says, my love, Rav Masna da Amar Rabbi Yoshia, Ubar Pada da Amar Rabbi Yonason. So I'll say, Sabi Pashtos, Rav Masna is going to say like Rabbi Yoshia. So remember again, Rav Masna, who said that a stam neder nazirus is 30 days, 30 active days, he'll hold like Rabbi Yoshia. Ubar Pada da Amar Rabbi Yonason. And Bar Pada, who said that it's 29 active days of Nazirus, he will hold like Rabbi Yonason. To which the Gemara says, Amar Lacha Rab Masna, no. Kule Alma Shloshim Ba'inan. Rav Masna says, no, you're wrong. Everyone agrees that a Stam Neder Nazirus, is going to require 30 days. Everyone agrees. So what's the machlokes here? Very interesting. V'hacha ba'ad bichlal. I will say here the machlokes is, in general, I will say when you count days, does the count include the final day or not include the final day? I will say we have this machlokes, this concept, or I should say this principle, manifests itself in various machloksim throughout Shas. Essentially, ad va'ad bichlal means up until and including. Ad velo ad bichlal, up until and not including. So Rav Masna wants to suggest everyone agrees that a stam neder nazirus is going to extend for 30 days. So what's the machlokes over here? The machlokes over here is, do we say ad va'ad bichlal or ad velo ad bichlal? How does this come up? So here we go. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yoshia Savar, Rabbi Yoshia holds, Rabbi Yoshia Savar, ad velo ad bichlal. Rabbi Yoshia holds up until but not including. Rabbi Yonason Savar, ad va'ad bichlal. And Rabbi Yonason, on the other hand, holds that halacha l'maisa ad va'ad bichlal. So take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, it's Rashi 2, 4, 6, 8, about 12 lines up from the bottom. Rabbi Yoshia Savar, the haydich siv ad melos ad lamid mashma v'lo shloshim bichlal. So we'll say it's very interesting. Rabbi Yoshia holds that when it says ad melos means what? Up until 30, not including 30. Therefore, Rabbi Yoshia holds, we'll say, therefore, according to Rabbi Yoshia, you need gadol pera rosho to teach me that what? Day number 30 is included as well. That it's through number 30. So again, Rabbi Yoshia in his essence holds ad velo ad bichlal. So melos would teach me up until 30 days. Gadol pera rosho, the growth of his hair, teaches me that day number 30 is included as well. Look at the next Rashi. Rabbi Yonason savra ad va'ad bichlal, v'lo itzrichla megadol pera, di'ilu me'ad melos chayam naka. Rabbi Yonason, on the other hand, holds no, ad va'ad bichlal. Therefore, ad melos means up until and including the 30th day. Shabbos says, so Rav Masna totally destroyed this. Again, the Gemara wanted to show that the machlokes Rav Masna and Bar Pada was in fact a machlokes Tanoim. Comes Rav Masna and says, no, everyone agrees with me that halacha l'maisa, again, it is, a stam neder nazirus is 30 complete days. The machlokes between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonason is ultimately, again, in ad va'ad bichlal, ad velo ad bichlal, and how they dash in the respective psukim. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar Mar. So the Gemara says, good. Amar Mar. So we'll say, so now the Gemara goes back to the drasha, right? Rabbi Yonason said, originally in the Havamina, Rabbi Yonason was saying like this. The Torah, when it speaks about the Nazir, says that it calls the duration of the Neder Nazirus melos, a completion of days. And originally Rabbi Yonason wanted to say, what's an example of a unit of days which complete, or I should say, what's an example of individual days which complete a unit of time? The example was a month. And originally in the Havamina we said, Rabbi Yonason showing that what do you see from here? That since a month can be 29 days, therefore melos for Nazirus could also be 29 days. So the Gemara says, 1 second, why is it only the days of a month That why is it only the days of a month that represent individual units that make up a whole? Maybe it's a week. Maybe it's a week. In other words, a week is also made up of individuals' days. So the Gemara says, Shabbos mi'ika chasirusa. It can't be Shabbos. Also, why? Because Shabbos has no deficiency. In other words, there is never a week that is less than 7 days. Right? So, in other words, that's the idea that Rabbi Yonasan was focusing on, was the lotion of melos, something male, something that is complete. Right? When you call something male, what does that indicate to us? That it could also be chaser. In other words, something is only called male if it could be chaser, right? Because otherwise, if it can't be chaser, I would say it's kind of like you could only call someone a tzaddik if they have the ability for what? To be a rasha. In other words, the level of tzaddik is meaningless if there's not an alternative, right? The light is only meaningful because there's choshech, right? So the idea of calling something male, calling something melos, is only meaningful because sometimes it's complete, sometimes it's not complete. So therefore, the Gemara says melos cannot refer to the unit of time of a week because a week is never chaser. There are weeks that we wish were chaser. Right? There are definite days I wish it was Friday, I wish it was Shabbos, but Lamaisa, you can wish it all you want. Day is 7 weeks, and that has not changed since my separations, right? They're not going to change. Therefore, a week can't be malos. Top of Zayin, ve'ema shana. Interesting, what about a year? What about a year? Shabbos say, this is fascinating. To which the Gemara says, no. Because mimanin Yomi, or let's say a Jewish year, right? Our calendar is not counted by days. It's not counted by days. Miman Yomi, Vahara Abanam de Kesari Amri, Minayin Shemonin Yamim Lashanim. How do we know that we don't count days towards the month? Shene'emar L'Chodshei Hashana, because the pasuk says L'Chodshei Hashana, the months of the year. Chadoshim Echashun L'Shanim, V'lo Yamim L'Shanim. So both say this is incredible. So Halach L'Maisa, the Gemara says we don't count days towards the year. Right? How many days are there in a year? The truth is it could depend. I mean, now the calendar is fixed, but it could depend. It could really depend. So I will say, so therefore, again, we count 12 months during the year, or 13 months in a leap year, but we don't count days. Therefore, I will say, kind of circling back. So therefore, in Rabbi Yonasan's drasha of melos, in the havamina of the drasha, so when the Torah calls that Nazir is melos yamim, melos male, that tells me that therefore, again, it's linked to a unit of time, which is sometimes male, sometimes chaser. What's the only unit of time in halacha that is sometimes complete, sometimes incomplete? It's only a month, right? Because it's never a week is always 7 days. It's never a year because a year is always a requisite number of months. The only unit of time that is sometimes mali, sometimes chaser is a chodesh, is a month, sometimes 29 days, sometimes 30 days. Good. So that brings to us the conclusion of the sugya. There's only one problem. How do we paskin? All right, one little detail. So we had this whole beautiful machlokes between Rav Masda. I want to point out, sometimes machlokes is beautiful. Right? Sometimes machlokes is beautiful. What kind of machlokes is beautiful? Machlokes l'shem shamayim. Right? When there's a disagreement, when there's a dispute, to figure out the Dvar Hashem, as long as it's done with shalom, with mutual respect, mutual admiration, it's the most beautiful type of machlokes in the world. So now we have again machlokes bar Pada and Rav Masna. So what do we do? So we'll say, here we go. The Rambam to the rescue. So Rambam in Hilchos Nazirus, Perek Gimel. By the way, I'll make a suggestion to you, just if you have time. If one of the things that's very helpful, especially with Daf Yomi, is what we always try to do is do it halacha l'maisa. Obviously, we're skipping a whole bunch of steps in the learning process from going from a Gemara to a Rambam, a Gemara to a Shulchan Aruch. But if you have time, like if you have a couple of minutes, it's kedai to just begin to learn through the Rambam's Hilchos Nazirus. Just start. You could pick it up on Sefaria. You could even get English. I think it even has English translation for the Rambam on Sefaria, right? So you could see it all there, and it's just a great way to kind of familiarize yourself with that. Again, we're going to go through everything pertinent, but again, everyone's looking for some additional reading here and there, right? Rambam Hilchos Nazirus is actually some light reading. It's some light. You don't have to even get into the Mefarshim. So listen to this. We'll say. So Perek Gimel, Stam Nazirus Shloshim Yom. Rambam Paskin's like Rav Masna. Like Rav Masna, a Stam Neder Nazirus is for 30 active days. Ketzad, Misham Harini Nazir in Pachos Mishloshim Yom. Right, so I will say, so Allah Kalamaisa, person says, I'm a Nazir. By definition, there is no Neder Nazirus less than 30 days. No neder nazir is less than 30 days. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, it's 30 complete days, like Rav Masna, and any karbanos, the shaving of the hair, everything else done on day 31. Shabbos the Rambam goes on, he gives other examples of this, but that's what we need for today. Now, what about the miktas yom kikulo? Right, we'll say, so what happens if someone becomes Tamei on day number 30? So we'll discuss this more. So we paskin that by Naziros, we do not say miktas yom kikulo. Right, now again, when you have consecutive Nidrei Naziros, we'll talk about that later on. We'll get into that again more later on. But halacha l'maisa, if you become Tamei on day number 30, again, we'll see this also explicitly, you have to repeat the whole thing. So we'll say, what I will point out is something very interesting, that by Naziros, it may be that halacha l'maisa, we don't go ahead and paskin miktas yom kekulo. So I will say, but I will tell you that, so that's halacha l'maisa. Hashkafa l'maisa, we definitely paskin miktas yom kekulo. We'll say, what does that mean? You know, sometimes a person has a really bad day. And I don't just mean like a bad day, like, you know, work wasn't good or this, that. I mean like, as an individual, in my ruchnius, it was just a really bad day. Happens to all of us. And I will say, sometimes I'm coming to the end of that bad day, and you know, the only thing that compounds a bad day is when you are fully cognizant of the fact that you had a really bad day. Right? And so sometimes a person is oblivious. Okay, so that's fine. They don't know. I will say, but perhaps all of us, right? I have a day where I really messed up. I made some significant mistakes, and I am not happy with where I'm holding as a person. So I will say, so what do you do, right, when you recognize that? So I will say, it's incredible. What do? You pull yourself together, and you do something meaningful on that day. Salvage the day. Whatever it is, open up your Gemara and learn. Do an act of chesed. Give tzedakah. You know, whatever you need to do to infuse some type of positivity, you have the ability to turn the day around. You'll say, no, I don't. Right? It's 10 minutes before Shkia, 10 minutes before sunset. The day is almost over, and I messed up most of it. I will say, how do we paskin? Miktsas hayom kikulo. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of positivity in order to spiritually salvage the totality of the day. You're right, you can't go back in time, but lamaisa, miktsas hayom kikulo. Sometimes a little bit of positivity, a little bit of holiness, a little bit of ruchnius, even in a really bad day, has the ability to salvage the day in its totality. So we might not paskin miktsas hayom kikulo by Naziros, but be'inyane hashkafa l'maisa, we always paskin miktsas hayom kikulo. We'll stop here. We're going to do Mesilas Yesharim now for a few minutes. Finish off Emir Hashem the parak in Mesilas Yesharim. All right, we'll say good morning. Let us conclude. Emir Hashem, parak chaf. Incredible. We're finishing up parak chaf. Mesilas Yesharim. Ramchal says nimtseis lamed. Therefore, it turns out that we learn. What is it that we learn? She'abalis chasid chasidus amitrabos. Remember again, the title of this parak was Mishkala Chasidus, weighing Chasidus. And the whole point that Ramchal was making within this parak was what? That being a chasid requires me to weigh my actions. And sometimes something may look good in the moment, but may in fact really be detrimental and negative. So here he's going to sum this up. Nimseis lamed. It turns out, I'll say this last piece is almost like it's a summary of the entire parak. Nimseis lamed. Shabal is chasid chasidus amiti. If somebody wants to be truly pious, sarach sheyishkol kol na'asav lefiat halodos hanushachos bohem. I will say it is not enough to look at my actions through the prism of the present. I have to think about what my actions are going to cause in the future. The toldos, right? What's the offspring? What's the repercussions, ramifications, the results of my actions? Lefi ha'es. So I will say, I have to look at the context, the ace. Like right now, at this time, is this the right thing to do? Lefi ha'chevra. I will say, socially, I have to examine if I do this now in this chevra, is the right impact socially. Lefi ha'nosei. Literally means, again, according to the subject, meaning, is this something that is truly necessary or not? Ulafia makom, and where I am situationally. situationally. So we'll say, what Ramchal says is, before you do something that you think is pious, that you think is chasidus, you just have to weigh it. Is it the right place? Is it the right time? Is it with the right group of people? Is it going to have positive byproducts now and in the future? Or is it going to be something that may be episodically positive, but Lamaisa could have long-term detrimental effects? And I both say sometimes you answer these questions, say to yourself, you know what? It's not the right time. It's not the right place. It's not the right chevra. And therefore it turns out that what? That sometimes abstaining from doing something is actually more pious than the performance of the act itself. It's incredible. He says, sometimes you could have something that looks really good, really pious, but if I do this, the results are going to be negative. And I will say sometimes you'll have something that may look negative right now, but in the long run, in the long term, ultimately will be positive. So look what the Rebbe says. Look at this. Hakol holech achar hachitum v'hatalada. The Rebbe says, isn't this incredible? How sometimes again our worlds collide. What do we just say by Nazirus? It's all by how you finish, right? You got to cross the finish line. What did the Ramchal say? Hakol holech achar hachitum. Everything is determined by how you finish. Now, the Rebbe say, the goodness and the piety of any individual act is not simply measured by its present importance, but the piety of any particular act is measured by how it's going to end. What's the ramifications of this long term? What are the repercussions of this act down the road? That's what really determines the effectiveness and the piety of this particular act. It goes on. Because I will say, at the end of the day, life is a long game, right? Life is not a short, life is a long game. So therefore, I will say, when we act, when we make decisions, and this happens to all of us too often, all we're doing is I'm looking at the present, totally uncognizant of the future repercussions and ramifications of my actions. What is good and what is pious and what is holy is not simply determined by what is good now, but it has to be determined by what will be good down the road as well. I will say, making these decisions really requires an understanding heart, right? It's not pasha. It's not pasha. The Ramchal says, everything I do, I have to think about, like, what are the long-term repercussions and ramifications of this action? He goes on, he says, because the truth is, in order to make these decisions, he has to have what you call a leiv mavin, an understanding heart, and a seichel nachon, and a right, and literally, again, a correct intellect. In other words, we'll say, you have to be a thinking, thoughtful person in order to be able to make these types of decisions in a right way, because it's impossible to spell out all of the details. And hopefully HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us knowledge and wisdom to make these decisions correctly. Rabbi Tarfon, what happened to Rabbi Tarfon? An incredible story. So we'll say the Mishnah Maseches Brachos tells a story of Rabbi Tarfon. There's a machlokes Beisham Beisila about Kriyas Shema, right? What physical position do you have to have in Shema? So remember again, the pasuk by Shema says B'shach b'cha u'v'kumecha, when you lie down and when you get up. Beis Shammai holds that at night you have to say Shema lying down, and by day standing up. Beis Hillel says no, you say Shema, you don't say Shema lying down. B'shach b'cha u'v'kumecha doesn't refer to physical posture, but rather refers to the time of day. The Gemara tells the Mishnah tells Rabbi Tarfon who was traveling, and it was nighttime, and he decided to be machmir like Beis Shammai. And what did he do? He lay down on the side of the road. Well, he put himself in mortal danger because they were bandits, and he almost got killed. So his fellow rabbinic colleague said to him, "You know what? You should have gotten killed." It's always good to have friends like that, right? In other words, you deserved it. You deserved it. Why? Because what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you being machmir like Beis Shammai? Don't pass like Beis Shammai. So I'll say, what do you see here? Part of Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon is just trying to be machmir. He's just trying to be machmir. There was a machlokes Beisham Beis Hillel, and it was an important matter for Klal Yisrael. The halacha follows Beis Hillel. The We'll say ultimately the halacha was decided like Beis Hillel, and that's important because once the halacha is decided, that becomes the practice for Klal Yisrael. V'lo yachlash b'shum panim, and the observance, proper observance, should not be weakened in any way. Shelo taseh Torah chas v'chalila kishtei toros. Because Rabbi say again, if halachic practice is not solidified, then what happens? Over time, it becomes like Klal Yisrael's two Torahs. There's going to be a Beis Shammai Torah, Beis Hillel Torah. Therefore, what v'alkin l'das ha'mishnah azos yoser chasidus u'lahachzik kebeis Hillel afilu kula. So it's such a fascinating example of this. So look what's happening over here. Rabbi Tarfon, right? Rabbi Tarfon sees as a machlokes Hashem Beis Hillel. Obviously, Beis Shammai is more machmir than Beis Hillel, which is true most of the time. Obviously, number of victims most of the time. So what's going on in Rabbi Tarfon's mind? Rabbi Tarfon says, you know what? I want to be a chassid. So what does it mean to be a chassid in this context, according to Rabbi Tarfon? What does it mean? I'm going to paskin like Beis Shammai and lay down on the ground for Kriyas Shema Shal Arvis. And meanwhile, what were they telling Rabbi Tarfon? Rabbi Tarfon, that's not chasidus. Why? Because Rabbi Tarfon, now I'll say, watch this, Rabbi Tarfon, the halacha was decided like Beis Hillel. And if you decide to be machmir like Beis Shammai, you're Rabbi Tarfon. And if people see you being machmir like Beis Shammai, what will happen? They'll be machmir like Beis Shammai as well. And now you can have groups of people being machmir like Beis Shammai, and groups of people being machmir or pasking like Beis Hillel. And what's going to happen? Rabbi say, what's going to happen? It's going to be like two Torahs. Klal Yisrael will be split. So Rabbi says, an incredible example. Here, Rabbi Tarfon thinks he's doing something good by being machmir. He's doing something good by taking something upon himself. What were his colleagues telling him? Rabbi Tarfon, you know what your problem is? You're only looking at your act through the prism of the present, but you're not recognizing the future repercussions of your actions upon Klal. So I'll say, what an incredible example. In other words, they weren't blasting Rabbi Tarfon for being machmir. In other words, you want to be machmir, be a machmir, I'll say. But if you want to be machmir, just contemplate the impact of your chumras upon other people. And Rabbi Tarfon, you are a gadol b'Yisrael. So if you are machmir in this situation, that could lead ultimately to masses following you, and no nase kishtei toros. Va'alkin dasa mishnazos yoser chasidus hulahachse kibeisaf l'kula milahachmir kibei Shammai. Therefore, they were saying to Rabbi Tarfon, the Mishnah is saying is, what is chasidus? I will say, what is chasidus in this case? Chasidus in this case is to paskin like Beis Hillel, even though they're more mekel than Beis Shammai. But 1 second, how is that chasidus? That's chasidus because I will say, because the long-term repercussions and ramifications of paskin like Beis Shammai is splintering Klal Yisrael. Isn't that incredible? It's such an incredible ma'aseh here. Rabbi Tarfon is not trying to shift the halacha. What is Rabbi Tarfon trying to do? According to Rabbi Chal, what is Rabbi Tarfon trying to do? What is he trying to do? Personal chumrah. I want to be machmir. I'm not telling anybody to do what they. In other words, everyone should do like Beis Hillel. Me, I want to be machmir. And what the Rabbanim, other Rabbanim say to Rabbi Tarfon is, that's fine, but you're Rabbi Tarfon. You're Rabbi Tarfon. You're not an individual. You're Rabbi Tarfon. You're a gadol Yisrael. People look at what you do and they follow your lead. So if you start this, understand you're leading the road down to a major split within Klal Yisrael. Said Rabbi Tarfon, chasidus for you is not to be machmir like Beis Shammai. Chasidus for you is what? To be maker like Beis Hillel and to reinforce normative halachic practice. Incredible. The Ramchal says this story is like a guiding light for us to see what is the true light of Chasidus. Lasos hayashar be'enei Hashem, to do that which is right in the eyes of Hashem. Stay for say, so beautiful. The Ramchal ends off. The Ramchal ends off by teaching us again the major theme of this parak, that in order to understand what is truly Chasidus, it's not enough to look at the act through the prism of the present, but rather a person has to look at the ramifications of this action in the future as well. If the ramifications for the future are good, go ahead and do it. But if the ramifications for the future are negative, even if there is some potential for present good, better to abstain. So sometimes performance generates chasidus, and sometimes abstention generates chasidus. But as Ramchal says, a person needs a leiv, what was his lashon? A leiv mavin and a seichel nochum. Person has to have an understanding heart and a literally, again, a correct seichel to be able to analyze these things. Rabosai, Mazel Tov on finishing Parak Chaf. And Mir session tomorrow we begin Parak Chaf Aleph. We're not finished with Chasidus yet. We still have a lot with Chasidus. But tomorrow we begin Parak Chaf Aleph. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.